And I believe we may already be live.
It shows.
Okay. And I think we are live. Sanchari, you want to go ahead?
Maybe I'll wait because there's still.
There's still a lag. I see that.
There is
Okay.
a lag, yeah. So maybe
Okay.
about 30 seconds or 1 minute or so, then we can.
1 year on, you think we'd have this down to a T of virtual conferences and networks, but.
Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome back to the STEMPeers Global Conference 2021, which is themed around the paths which are less taken. I'm Sanchari Banerjee, a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, and with me is Shohini Datta, who will be moderating the session. Shohini is a postdoctoral scientist at Mount Sinai. We had a great kickstart yesterday with the first session in the keynote session in the conference. And today we are geared up with the second panel session, which is focused on empowering scientists and society. We, as early career researchers, PhDs, and postdocs, we always wonder, what is our project about? Our project, does it have impact on the society, on the challenges, especially after the pandemic era that we are going through? And I think this is exactly what we discussed today in our second panel as to how we STEMpeer professionals can impact and contribute to make differences in the society. We are joined by three fantastic panelists today, and welcome to all of you. Please write your comments and questions in the comments box below for our panelists. And now I hand over the session to Shohini to take over.
Thank you, Sanchari, for that wonderful introduction. So once again, hello, everybody, and welcome to all who are tuning in from the different parts of the world. As Sanchari mentioned, this is our second panel discussion of the STEMPeers Global Conference 2021. We had a very exciting first day yesterday with a keynote address by Dr. Adriana Bankston, where she talked about the importance of STEM knowledge in influencing science policy-making process to drive the future of science and technology revolution, which was then followed by a panel discussion on careers and academia beyond the tenure track route. Both of these sessions are on our STEMpeers YouTube channel, so please do go and check it out if you haven't had the chance to yet. And just expanding on what Sanchari already mentioned, today on our second panel discussion is on empowering scientists and society. And we are very excited to have three panelists with us today who are examples of how STEM professionals can make a difference in our society. In the past year, more than ever before, we have seen how important it is to build an inclusive society where scientific knowledge and the transfer of that knowledge is important for societal growth. Science empowers us to challenge the threshold of our limitations to think and do something bigger and better. And it's becoming more and more important to create a space for inspiration and transparent and better communication. So today we will discuss how our panelists have utilized the power of knowledge to create a more mature, smart, and empowered STEM workforce that is contributing significantly to the betterment of our society, and learn from their experience and listen to their advice for the fellow professionals. So today we have with us today Pratibha Narayanan, who is a strong believer in student-centered education and data-driven approach to designing education programs, and is a program manager at Involved Learning Solutions Foundation. Jess Krieger, one of the first scientists in the world to recognize the potential of cultivated meat as a solution for the environmental issues caused by the traditional animal agriculture, and she's a pioneer in the alternative protein industry and has recently started her second startup in developing a cultivated ribeye product. And we have with us our third panelist, Dina Mukherjee, who's the Director of Strategic Marketing at Cactus Communications, where her role is to assist researchers to get access to technology and solutions created to solve specific needs and gaps at different stages of the research life, or the research journey, therefore enhancing the potential and improving the overall quality of the research life. I just want to make sure that we are all on gallery view. We are, right? Okay, it stopped in between. But anyway, so without further ado, I want to ask each of you your journey and to where did this thought process come from, doing something different, and I say this different because now it's becoming something that's more and more common, but even 5 years ago, these were not the traditional routes that were taken by STEM professionals, especially if they've done their PhD and their postdoc. I can, like, Pratibha, do you want to go ahead with this?
Oh, thank you so much for the wonderful introductions, Sohini and Sanchari, and also thanks for inviting me as part of this panel. So as Shoni mentioned, I currently work in the education sector in India, in the nonprofit education space specifically. I moved into this space right after I completed my PhD. I did my PhD in neuroscience from the Max Planck Institute in Germany. And post that, I immediately moved to Teach for India, which is a large education nonprofit based in India, and where I was teaching science and maths to grade 8th to 10th students in a slum in Jogeshwari in Mumbai. So that was my first sort of transition into nonprofit education. And I think the major reason why I kind of saw myself being able to make that switch was within academia, I felt that I was getting limited in how I could apply myself a lot more to what I was learning. And that is where I started looking for opportunities where I knew that there was a skill set that I had acquired over the past 7 years, 8 years that I spent in academia. And just to learn how to apply that in a more field context was something I was interested in doing. And particularly the education landscape in India was something very interesting for me because I knew that there were fundamental issues with the way education is treated in India. And so coming back here and kind of plugging in whatever I had learned as part of my scientific career and seeing how I could apply like just a data-driven approach to designing programs, just how to evaluate programs in a more cohesive manner like we do scientifically. I think these were some interest areas that kind of brought me or transitioned me into this field. Yeah, I think.
Okay, we'll go back to some more details about that journey later on. But Jess, do you want to go next?
Sure. So grateful to be invited to speak on this panel today, and I'm very excited to share my experiences with everyone watching. I'm a person who really cares about the environment and animal welfare. And about 10 or 11 years ago, I learned about the environmental impact of animal agriculture and its contribution to climate change because there are greenhouse gases that are emitted from the industry. And there's also significant animal welfare concerns for the animals that are raised for animal agriculture. So I was pretty upset about learning these things, and I thought, maybe there's a better way to produce meat products that doesn't have animals as part of the equation. And I came up with a kind of crazy idea to grow meat from animal cell cultures, because we use cell culture technology for regenerative medicine, and maybe we could grow meat with a similar type of technology. So I didn't have any idea how to approach this, but I knew I needed to learn about the science because there was no blueprint. There was no research blueprint for how to develop a cultivated meat product. So I decided to become a scientist to do that and to enroll in a PhD program for biomedical sciences, where I learned a lot of the research techniques and methodologies that are applied to the regenerative medicine industry, they're really all parallel technologies to what has become the cultivated meat science, what has become cultivated meat science. But I also knew that in order to truly have an impact on the world, cultivated meat products needed to be commercialized. So I couldn't stay in academia for my career. I was going to have to learn how to develop these products, develop the products, and then commercialize them. So my goal the entire time was to do a PhD program, figure it out, and then start a company using the knowledge that I had acquired.
Wow. Again, I have lots of questions, but we can come back to that. Dina, can you just briefly talk about Cactus's journey and how it became this big company, especially in a particular subcontinent, and how that has helped researchers, with their very basic day-to-day life, like publishing or getting edits, checks done, and all of that stuff.
Thanks, Sohini, and thank you, Sanchari, for a very nice, wonderful introduction. Let me first compliment both Pratibha and Jess for working on something which is astounding. Seriously, the way researchers think, the way you choose to become a researcher, that passion itself is what is what amazes people like us in Cactus. And just to tell you, a lot of us are not researchers, so we are the general audience who are reaping the benefits from researchers. So it's outstanding. Jess, you're going to revolutionize the way fast food industry works. That's the way we can look at it in terms of its commercial advantage, in terms of carbon footprinting, which most organizations are trying to control. So that's where you're headed. And Pratibha, you are looking at you're helping create an alternate solution, and at a segment where even the government is struggling. So that's outstanding. So that's where the thought process of a researcher really makes us go crazy to do everything to help the researchers. So just to give you a little bit of idea about, so I, of course, work with the strategy and marketing division in Cactus. But the Cactus story is quite interesting. Our founder and CEO, Abhishek Goyal, basically was an exchange student in his college days, and he went to Japan, and he was working with a professor on a certain project. And it was a project in which he was working with a set of researchers, and a certain professor actually asked him to help him translate, to edit his English paper. So he'd done a paper in Japanese, and he wanted it to be, the edit in English to be improved upon. So the funny story is Abhishek did do it. He passed it on to his brother, who said, I don't have time for it, who passed it on to his mother. And mom was very excited because she was, good in English, and she really wanted to show her skills, and she edited the paper and gave it back to the researcher. And he was so happy. He was so grateful. He was so, and we're talking about year 2000, actually, about almost 21 years back. And he was just so happy that that's where it was the first time that Abhishek realized that I had literally done nothing. But he said, according to the researcher, he really made his science possible, especially in terms of communicating it to a much larger audience, because it was now going to get published in an English journal. So it was a great idea. It was struggling at one stage, staying within the local framework, but then it became global because of a very small, initiative which was taken up. So from there, the story began with one researcher and one paper. And today we are looking at over 6 million papers, over 3 million researchers with whom we have worked over so many years. But the exciting part, which I feel Cactus has been able to do, apart from supporting researchers in their publication journey, in their journey to find technology which assists them, we actually have over 4,000 researchers working with us as editors, as freelance editors. So that's where I feel is a large amount of effort that has gone out to build this community of researchers who have an alternate source of revenue. At the same time, they actually have enough knowledge in their space to be able to contribute in order to support other researchers. So if you see our editors who are working with us are actually all on-ground researchers who are working in their field, and they actually support other researchers by helping them edit their paper. So with that pretext, what Cactus is trying to do, and hopefully we are doing it well, is to be able to support researchers, at the same time provide opportunities to researchers in order to be able to facilitate their career,
and as well as give them opportunities to assist other researchers, create communities, and be a part of a much larger network. So while we can call researchers our clients, but we also have a researcher community which is working for those clients. So it's a very beautiful, interdependent, space, which is able to support researchers at every stage. So whether it's an early career researcher or a professor, we're actually able to support every researcher at every stage of their career. And we can talk about more about that later. Thanks.
Okay, that is wonderful. Okay, I'm going to come back to a few points that each of you talked about. As Pratibha, as Dina touched upon briefly, ensuring that education reaches all the sectors of the country, especially in India, has been a challenge for many, many years. How, when you first joined Teach for India, and then when you decided to work at Involve, what are some of the challenges you faced, implementing this idea that you had? And were there certain skills that you developed during your PhD that you were able to take forward, apart from imparting your knowledge to everybody else? So how was that process? What were some of the, how did that path, or how did that journey look like?
I think there was, whenever we think of a PhD, it's usually so much about the hard skills and about the research and about the content of what you're doing. But for me personally, the whole exercise in PhD was actually a skill building exercise incomplete, because even today, a lot of what I do comes from what I learned from my PI, from the way my lab operated. There is a lot that I actually do in my work today. I think immediately when I moved into Teach for India or into the education sector, it wasn't so visible to me as to how much skills I'm sort of carrying forward. But as I evolved into my role, I'm today in a more leadership position, I actually see where the parallels are. When I came into the sector, of course, there was one major challenge was the access itself is extremely low to education. So you have like a huge range of students when you're working with them. So there's like students who are really struggling with basics and students who are doing really well. So just to figure out the entire system of education in the country took me a while. Like, even though we are all products of the same system, but being on the other side of it and trying to understand what's happening was definitely one of my biggest challenges. And I think one of the key skills that I kind of evolved over the course of my master's and PhD, which was just observation. I think that was really something that helped me understand what was going on in the whole system. So I actually spent a lot of time observing students, parents, communities, other teachers, public schools, private schools, just to sort of widen my understanding of the whole segment. And that whole process, like, I was able to do it in that rigorous manner only because I had kind of done something like that during my PhD, of just being able to observe what exists and not infer, not judge, nothing, just observe and kind of take away from it. So I think that is definitely a huge transferable skill. Besides that, I think two major skills I feel helped me in great stead was just planning. I think it's a very underrated skill, but in the PhD phase, especially when you have let's say I was part of a group that was very new. My PI was really young, so we were just starting out. We were 2 PhD students when I was doing my PhD. And so the entire setup of the lab was something we had to do. And so in that time, just planning for every little thing, knowing what to budget for, knowing how to think about, the future and back planning from there. I think all of those skills are something that I apply very much today in my everyday work, because I plan today I plan education programs across 4 states. And so for me, it's very essential to be able to plan, okay, 5 years from now, how will this program deliver? And therefore today, what do I need to do to deliver that? And so I think that, again, it's a very soft skill, but during a PhD, because of the amount of independence you are left with, it really teaches you this skill compared to a lot of other ways that you pick up this skill. And I think the other skill that has held me in good stead, I would say, is conflict resolution. It's not something that we are born with. It's a very developed skill. And I think I used to struggle with that a lot. But during the PhD, again, just having to work with so many different people, just try to sort of find that kind of balance of what you're sort of wanting to do versus what is expected of you. And all of those kind of just figuring out all of those conflicts was a huge learning experience for me. And I think that is something, again, today I manage multiple stakeholders and people at various levels of the hierarchy. And so it really comes in use when I know how to communicate with a certain level of stakeholder, because I've had those experiences before. So I think there is a lot of skill-based transferability. And even though I'm not particularly doing any science anymore, but I enjoy teaching it and I enjoy like talking about it. But still, I feel like the whole purpose of my PhD was essentially to equip me with these skills that today actually have allowed me to kind of go from teacher to managing 4 states in just a year, 2 years time. So I think that was the growth that I experienced.
I think there's some very good takeaway points over there. You know, what I think people are becoming more and more aware of is that science is not necessarily what you're doing in the lab. It's also about the different things you take away from it, because, you know, there's just so much more to science than just the bench work. Because while that's such an important part of science, there are other aspects to science that are equally important, including communication and ensuring that, you know, we are somehow empowering the next generation and the generation after that to be equally interested in science as we are, and telling them, like, you know, there's not just one angle to it, there's so much you can do with that. And those are some great takeaway points. Jess, coming to you, you know, I have had very brief opportunity to actually see you in lab, like, you know, while I was entering the Welshens lab and you were there in the same lab space. You know, doing a PhD itself is not easy, as we all know. Like, you know, there are so many different facets to it. And there are times when people question that, why are we even doing this? All the hardships and also all the excitement that come with it. You, while doing your PhD, were also talking to investors, having meetings, and doing all of that to develop your first startup. And within a year of that, you started your second one. So my question is, how did you manage? Like, how did you plan out? As Pratibha said, one of the things that we learn from PhD is planning. But how did you multitask at this level to do these different things?
Honestly, I would not recommend starting a company while you're doing a PhD, because the workload that I was dealing with was incredibly stressful, and I didn't have a lot of time to myself. I was basically working, you know, from the moment that I woke up to when I would go to sleep at night, and I was not a happy camper. But in terms of the planning that went into it, you know, I would kind of think about my goals and work backwards from there. You know, what do I need to accomplish? And, you know, set up milestones for, you know, what I need to accomplish to accomplish the final thing. And develop like a strategic framework for who I need to talk to, what papers do I need to read, what do I need to learn, and be very intentional about it. And I'll share a challenge that I experienced when I was transitioning from, you know, just being a PhD student to also being an entrepreneur. I ran into challenges that I did not plan for, and that I did not know that I was going to be facing. For example, you know, talking about science in academia is a completely different communication style then talking about science as an entrepreneur to investors. So when I started talking to investors, I spoke like an academic scientist, and I was explaining everything. And, they looked at me like they had no idea what I was talking about, and I was over explaining too much detail. So I actually had a serious difficulty when I started speaking to investors, and I had to come up with a plan for how I was going to deal with this, because I was not going to be successful if I didn't build new skills. So when you hit a wall and you realize that you don't know how to do something, or there's like a very real skill set that you're lacking, you have to face those challenges honestly, and don't feel bad about them, because when you transition, there's inevitably a skill gap, and you have to learn new skills in order to become good at the next thing that you're going to do. So identify those skill gaps, and then come up with a strategy come up with a plan for how you're going to build those skills. And then reach out to people who have experience with what you are trying to get good at. And those can be mentors, it can be friends, it can be peers, and then also the internet. There's so many helpful videos on YouTube about how to build different skills. So I would say in that way, planning was critical to the course of my career. But you have to really sit down and be strategic about it.
Again, some very good takeaway points, but I think what we're getting, at least from what Pratibha and Jess mentioned, that your plans and your ideas can change over time, but at least for the next step, be as informed as you can be about what the different skills and how to go about planning that transition, or whatever you want, whatever next step that you take on your journey. Dina, I have a slightly different question for you. One of the points that our keynote speaker from yesterday, she mentioned that while she was talking about science policies and changes that are needed, she said there is a huge lack of non-English articles, articles which are not in English. So most of the articles, scientific research manuscripts or articles that we read, they're in English, but there needs to be more and more of, other languages. Just as you mentioned that when Abhishek, when he went to Japan, he received articles which were in their language. So as a communications company, does Cactus think about, growing the the kind of work that you do, not just in English, but also in other languages, and slowly build up that so that it's not restricted to just that? Is that something that Cactus as a company thinks about? And if you can just touch on all the different things that you're constantly have to be aware of while you're trying to build modules or different programs that help researchers in their life, I would say.
Sure, Sohini. So Cactus, of course, works with a lot of researchers out of Japan, Korea, China, primarily three of the countries which have huge amount of researchers as part of the research community. And then, of course, we have US, UK, and Europe as parts where we work with researchers. But and there are a lot of journals which publish in the local language. So and the researchers do get published, but what happens is that it does not get circulated beyond that geography. So that's where actually Cactus steps in. It steps in to making sure that your outreach is much higher than within your geography. So our prowess in understanding the language, the local language, and then ensuring the translation is as strong and as relevant in English as it is in the local language, because various AI tools actually just translate, while scientific translation is extremely different. So that is the first part. Hence, we have human editors working on it who will understand the efficacy of the paper and then accordingly translate. We also, of course, have technology assisting them at a certain level and then taking it to the next level. So there are various services which we work with at a basic level and then up to a different level, which where the scientific output is accurate in the language of choice. But specifically talking about communication, and I think researchers today work extremely hard on their field. And like Pratibha mentioned that, observation planning and conflict resolutions were the 3 steps, which was very important as part of a learning curve. And just spoke about milestones and transitioning and skill gaps and creating a strategy to talk to a very different audience. These are things which researchers are not taught. And they are not even exposed to anything like this. So you stay in your lab, you stay in your community, you stay in your university, and you speak a certain language with the same community. But when you want to go out of that and you want to reach out to the world for whether it's grants, whether it is investments, whether it is manufacturing, whether it is creation of that's where you are basically struggling. And so Cactus works in 2 areas. One is we have a platform. We have a brand called Impact Science, which works with universities, with labs, with researchers in creating content which is very relevant and easily digestible by the local audience. So it's a let's say you have a very complex idea, but the outcome is very simple and it's very innovative. Imagine that as a part of an infographic or a video, very beautifully telling the story about what you're trying to achieve. That's something which a layperson will be able to understand, a student will be able to understand, a teacher who's trying to explain newer aspects of science will be able to understand and share it. So shareable content, making science easily accessible, whether it's on platforms like Facebook, Instagram, websites, creating infographics which gives you the science, the logic of it, and exactly what the researcher is trying to reach. So that's something which we have a segment called Impact Science working globally. So some of the largest universities, some of the largest journal publishers are a part of our communication platform. We work with them to create these content. On the other hand, we work with researchers, training them on various aspects. So it could be as simple as training early career researchers on how to write a paper, how to write your introduction, how to write your title. It could be as basic as that. And to a much larger level, even helping senior researchers how to become peer reviewers, or how to present your paper in a conference. What are the presentation skills that you need to have as part of your as part of sharing your research on a larger platform? And today, digital being the medium, how is it that you manage to cater to a platform like YouTube, going live on Facebook? All of these are parts of a certain training which we work with researchers all over the world. So while large part of it is still for them to be able to do better within their field of research, what I do feel is that every researcher, and this is taking a leaf from David Epstein's book Range, which talks about generalization apart from specialization. So every researcher has to specialize. You have to find a field, you have to find a line, you have to really, really be good at it. But the need for a certain amount of generalization is extremely important for you to be able to do more than what you're doing, to be able to be more impactful. So that's something which I feel researchers can work, and maybe we are working with universities, but we would like to also recommend universities, institutes, labs, mentors to take this as part of their learning curve for early career researchers, to be able to step out of their comfort zone of research, but also be able to do more. So that's something which on the entrepreneur worlds actually do it. We have leadership courses. We have a lot of we have the mandate to be able to expand our space. But that's because we work in a commercial space. We need to know marketing, we need to know finance, we need to know HR. But that's maybe not something. An administrative skill set is not expected. But when you become from an early career researcher to a PI to a lab head, you're actually an entrepreneur. You have to recruit, you have to look for funds, you have to you have to be able to do your finances. you're suddenly expected to run something very complex, but where's the training for that? So I think that's something which is very important to be invested in.
Sanjay, I believe there are some questions. Do you want to go ahead? And we have some questions from our audience, so I'll have Sanjay take on those questions.
Yeah, so we have a question from one of the participants about when you are building your entrepreneurial adventures, then how do you go on building the STEM workforce? Or in other ways, if you're trying to look into the behavioral aspects of the STEM people, what are you looking at when you try to hire them for your ventures? Pratibha, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I think I'll speak for myself in terms of why I feel like I fit into the role that I do based on my experiences as a scientist. I think the ability to rationalize very clearly is something, especially in the social sector that I currently work in. There is very little of that, in the sense that most people in the social sector are sort of, there's a do-gooder kind of feeling that they come in with, and they want to change a lot of things, and they want to kind of revolutionize everything. But there is very few people who are looking at it from a very objective lens, and who are able to kind of interpret things without getting emotional about it, or without sort of getting into that whole mindset of trying to help people. So someone who's able to kind of step back and just look at the facts and perceive it that way. And I think as a scientist, that's a huge, huge value add for the sector that I am in. We really need more people who can think in data, who can make data-driven decisions, who can see value in evaluating things more consistently, who see value in experiments, and who see value in failure. I think that's something that as a scientist, we've all experienced that, I think more than success, there is value in failure for us. And the social sector needs so much more of that mindset. And so I would say anyone who wants to kind of come into the social sector, that's your selling point, because that's the kind of people that we need more of within this sector. And I think as an entrepreneur, as someone who's starting out themselves, again, just the ability to kind of take critical decisions, but with very strategic, like Jess mentioned earlier, being very strategic and intentional in what you do. I think that is key. And as scientists, that's something that's part of our practice. So I think these would be the things that I would look for when someone is coming in from the STEM background.
Pratibha, actually, I have a follow-up question for that. With that, not many, when I say people, not many scientists think of going into working in the social structure right after they've done their PhD or postdoc or wherever they are in their education. And I'm not sure if there's, because of the risks that are involved, because they are not sure what that entails. Was that something that bothered you, or was that a challenge for you when you thought about it in first? And how did you go about, you talked about planning was important, but even when you decided to go back and do Teach for India, did you think about what can happen next, or what do I do from Teach for India? And did you have to learn a lot about the social structure? Again, in India, where that there will be some political or some other influence that are built into this. Did you have to go through a lot of training prior to shifting to and working with Teach for India?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of questions. So this was when I transitioned, or when I decided to kind of switch or leave academia for pursuing a career in the social sector. Initially, I didn't think of it as a long-term career. I thought I wanted to explore this. This was an area of interest, and I was really curious about the social sector since school. And I thought this was the right time for me to kind of just go and explore this. But I still remember it was just, this was just after I defended my thesis. There was like a 6-month, 7-month period where I was still working as a postdoc in my lab, and I was completing the work that I was assigned. And there was a conference held at the Max Planck, and I was presenting a paper on behalf of the lab, a poster on behalf of the lab. And one of the scientists, a really senior gentleman, came up, and I explained to him the whole poster, and he asked me a lot of questions. And he said, "Young lady, what are your plans after this?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm moving back to India in a couple of months to join the Teach for India Fellowship. It's a social sector fellowship and everything." And I explained to him everything. And then his response was, "That's a really bad idea." And that's it. And he just walked away. And I kind of like double guessed everything in that little moment of mine. And I went back to my PI, and I was like, I don't know if this is the right thing to do. Am I making a big mistake? Should I just like put my head down, continue in academia, and go and do a postdoc? And just because I was doing really well. I won sort of the summa cum laude for my PhD. I graduated like with the best PhD thesis over the past 2 years and everything. And so everyone kind of expected me to stay in academia. But then I think it was my PI, something that she said was really important in the decision that I made. She just said, if that's something that you want to really explore, go ahead. And if you think that's not your cake after a year, come back, the lab is always open. And the fact that she kind of gave me that security of saying, wherever I am in the world, you always have a space here. So even if you don't kind of feel invested in that after a year, come back to me. I think that was a huge factor. And I really credits to my PI for being such a strong supporter of people from her lab pursuing so much more than just science. So many of us from the lab have gone on to do a lot of other things, and she's been a constant source of support. So I think that's a huge factor in anyone around you in academia kind of encouraging you to do that. Besides that, in terms of transitioning, there was definitely huge challenges. I'd never experienced the social sector before. I had no idea of how it worked. I had no idea of how things on ground work. Like the first day I walked into Teach for India, into the school that I was assigned to, it was in the middle of a slum in Mumbai, which was infested with rats. The building was collapsed. There was literally no door to the school. There were 2 rooms in that school. And it was just something I had never, ever experienced in my life. The kind of students that I met there, the kind of communities that I worked with, I think it was just a huge learning curve for me. But it was extremely rewarding as well, because at the end of like 2 years when I left that school, my students had graduated 10th grade. All of them cleared the exams. 6 of my girls got scholarships to study in Bombay's best colleges. And so it was just like a huge learning curve, but also very rewarding. And I think that end of that year was what made me realize that this is the sector I want to stay in, and I might not be going back to academia again. And I actually wrote to my boss saying, thank you for what you told me, but I think I'm going to stay, because I think it really showed that I could do something and that I had something to offer to that sector. And I think that's an important assessment everyone needs to make in their career, is whether they stay in academia or whether they switch or wherever they go, do they feel like they have something to offer? And I think that sort of, if you're answering that, I think you're in the right place.
That was inspirational. Like I will let Santari take over again, but that was very inspirational. Like I've heard this before, but just hearing you talk about it again, it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that is. So Jess, I'll go back to you with the previous question of how do you look, what are the behavioral qualities you look into when you are trying to recruit people, the STEM force, into your ventures?
That's a great question. And a lot of the focus of hiring is figuring out if the potential hires have the necessary skills. And many scientists will fall back on, oh, I can do qPCR, I can do Western blots, I can do this, I can do that. It's clear from your resume or your CV that you do have those skills. And I can ask you questions in the interview process like, tell me about a time that you had issues with an experiment and what did you do to troubleshoot? What was your strategy? And then you can see how they think about problems, how they think about challenges. But actually, a question that I've found to be, so those are kind of the bare minimum of what people should be hiring for. But a question that I found to be very enlightening about that person's potential to be successful in the role that I'm hiring for is to provide them with a case study of what maybe a research challenge that they could very realistically be facing working at my company. So it gives them an opportunity to think about how they would apply all of those skills that they learned and the strategic, planning that they have and the knowledge that they have to real situations that are happening at the company. And it tells me a couple things. It tells me how they're going to perform in the role that I'm hiring for. It also tells me if they've critically thought about my business and the research at my business, and it also teaches me, do they understand the industry? Do they understand the challenges that the industry is facing? Have they really thought about it? So we're promoting a position we're hiring at Ohio Valley right now. So if you go check my LinkedIn and you have the qualifications, you can apply. But some of the applicants, they'll submit an application and, it's very clear that they are just mass applying to a bunch of different positions. But what I want is someone who's really thought about my business, who's really thought about the research challenges, and also has the ability to reason through the challenges that they're going to be facing at the company. So if you're serious about if you really want to work for a specific company, I think be prepared to think about things in that way. And then interviewers will not always ask you questions like that. If you actually ask your interviewer to provide questions to you, that would actually be very exciting for them. And they would see that, oh, this person really wants the job, but also wants to demonstrate to me that they can be successful in this role. So you will separate yourself out from the other candidates by asking for that. And then also you can demonstrate your skill and your expertise and your understanding of the science.
That's really good to know. And it's so different when we compare all the different panelists as to how the different behaviors that is required for the different roles out there. So I have a different question for you, Dina, here. And that is, how has Cactus ever thought how to support the scientists when they are communicating with investors for their entrepreneur roles?
Yes, Sanjari, that's actually a very relevant question. We actually are working with researchers who are working to raise funding. And I don't mean grant funding, I'm actually talking about funding for manufacturing. So we're working with researchers who are looking at working with investors. So that's where the simplification of their content is what we work with. Hence, it becomes very important for us to also educate the researcher to be able to present themselves, because we can create the content. In the end, like Jess had to convince them, she had to figure out how to speak the entrepreneurial language. So there is a certain amount of training and conversation which are done with the lab heads, with the researchers who are working in order to move out of just about basic research to research into application and commercialization. So that's actually quite a bit of a transition. And the communication helps, the content creation helps. It helps them to get people to hear them, to notice them, because it's simple, it's easy to understand. It makes sense. Okay, so this person is really trying to do this, is trying to create this. I want to know more. So the inquisitiveness, the curiosity is definitely something which we do. We also, of course, work with a similar space for grant application. Again, grant applications are extremely exhaustive, and people don't have time to go through pages and pages of it. So how can it be a simple storytelling experience where you just tell your story and see how it can come out well? So there's a lot of these aspects that we work with. As part of our, so we have these trainings which happen on a regular basis. We have these webinars, workshops consistently, which happen from experts. We have created something called the ambassador community in the researchers, where we are training them to be ambassadors who can walk the talk, be representative of what other researchers would like to also emulate. So we are also working with researchers, creating communities, ensuring we give them tools, empowering them with technology, with support. So keep this, the business side of is one part, but the support side is much larger as part of Cactus. Researcher Life is one of the websites which you can check out. It has a community called Voice. It has a platform called Discovery, which gives you content to read. It has segments which tells you how to publish. So these are things which we do in terms of supporting researchers. And there are aspects of our business which actually work with the researchers to help them understand how to work with entrepreneurs, with the outside world. So specifically, what I do feel is that researchers know their bit. They really know their bit very well. The issue happens when they are trying to move from one segment of communication where people understand them to a segment of communication where, so for example, Pratibha was told a complete no by a certain very senior professor because it just didn't make sense to that person. So they couldn't see that point of view. So showcasing that point of view is what becomes very important for us as an organization which is working on communications. That is the crux. Whether it is to do it with the help of technology, whether it's to do it with the help of people, whether it's to do it with the help of process, whether it is to do it with the help of a community, which is mentoring you to be able to do that. All of these aspects works towards ensuring that your research reaches its final destination, depending on what you're planning. So that's how we work. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina, for that. Yes. So we're kind of drawing close to an hour right now. So I have one question from the participants, and after that, I'll take some wrap-up comments from all the panelists. So this question is for Jess. And I have a follow-up question of something similar for Pratibha. So the question is for Jess, do you notice any additional challenges or bias being a woman in STEM and a woman entrepreneur?
Definitely. It's been a major theme in my life, actually. I have experienced gender discrimination during graduate school to various degrees. There were actually a number of very serious challenges that I faced that occurred because of gender discrimination on the part of faculty. As a woman entrepreneur, I have a different leadership style than the male entrepreneurs that I know. So when I talk to VCs, often they're expecting a very different type of person that's sitting across the table from them. What I really have going for me is I understand the science deeply. I've been in the industry for a long time, and I know where the industry is headed. So because of that, I've been able to move forward quickly with, raising money and launching the company. But 2% of venture capital goes to women founders. 2%. I have not heard a statistic like that for anything. Besides, that's an abysmal statistic. So one of the goals of my life is to support women in STEM, women who want to get into my industry, and then also women in STEM who are aspiring to become entrepreneurs in my industry. And I started an organization called WACA, Women of Cellular Agriculture. Cellular agriculture is like the broader industry that I'm part of, like cultivated meat is a part of that. Where it's an organization of women in STEM pursuing careers in cellular agriculture. One of the goals of that group is to provide a supportive environment to women who are in STEM and are facing all of the challenges that women face in STEM. But I think so we don't have an internet presence right now. We will in 6 months to a year from now, because I'm working out the kinks of the program. And then once we have the kinks out, then we'll have an internet presence. But, my general advice for, facing adversity in STEM just because you're a woman would be to remember that it's not about you. It's about society. It's other people have made up their minds about how they think about women and the roles of women. And most of the time, it's not coming from a place where they really think that women aren't as talented or as capable, but there's this unconscious gender bias that they're not even aware of, because we were raised in a society where women are still not thought of as being equal to men. That's just a fact, unfortunately. So remember that it's not about you, and that your inherent worth and your inherent capabilities have nothing to do with what other people think. And then surround yourself with a strong group of women who have the same kinds of attitudes and who will support you and help you overcome those challenges. And then also find male allies who believe the same things that you believe, but can be an advocate for you.
That was some hard-hitting stats, Jess, but and also a very good point that you made at the end. Actually, like following up on that, Pratibha, with Involve, you were involved from the groundwork to seeing it actually become live. Was there something, and you are the program manager, you're handling everything with Involve, and I'm sure in the future you're going to expand to other states. What did you face some similar hardships being in the forefront of this company, and then how going about that and making your voice heard, I would say, in designing the structure of the program?
Firstly, what Jess said, I think it's still striking me in terms of just the numbers that she put out. I think it's really, it's sad that we're in 2021 when we're talking of those numbers. It doesn't make sense, but that's just how it is. But I've kind of not really faced that level of discrimination or that level of sort of prejudice in the work that I do so far. What Jess specifically said about having male allies and having women who kind of build you up and support you, and I think I've been very lucky to have that network around me, because the people that I work with at Involve, including the founder, the co-founder, everyone has only been from day one extremely open to what I have to say, what I have to bring to the table, and the amount of respect that sort of is there for the opinions that I hold. And I think that I've been, it's sad to say, but I feel like I've been lucky in that no one should have to be lucky to be able to have this kind of an environment, but I think I have been. In the sense of the only challenge that I see as a woman in any sector for that matter is the lack of role models who you can actually see a future towards. because even within the social sector, there are very few women leading organizations. There are very few women who are in leadership roles or in sort of determining roles in organizations. And that's where you kind of reach a roadblock where you don't have enough mentors. Like Jess mentioned, it's very important for us to find mentors who kind of help you make those strategic plans, who kind of help you make those deliberate choices. But when you don't see mentors who are women, when you don't see enough people in leadership roles who are women, that's a challenge that I think I've faced within this sector. And I believe it is common across all sectors, just this lack of women in leadership roles. And I'm hoping that like people like Dina and Jess will change that for the coming future. But till then, that's definitely something that's the only thing I have struggled with personally in this area.
So just to add to what Pratibha and Jess is in, and I hope, Sohini, that's okay if I just jump in right here. So I was a part of one of panel discussion about a couple of years back where some of the biggest women entrepreneurs were a part of it. And so we had Naina Al-Kidwai, we had Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, and we had a lot of others who were a part of a certain panel. And this was done in certain stages. And it was interesting that they spoke about what the new, I'm specifically talking about our geography right now, but what the new India had to offer. And they said that at a time when we started off, we had to really work in a board of directors, which was all male. And a female could not really reach the board of director because just no, she will never have time. She's going to have family, she's going to have kids. We cannot give that kind of responsibility and expect her to, give work priority. She should not have a life. That's the only way they would consider. But it is changing. I think this 2% is a fact. But I do believe that there is a lot more that is right now in process, because the world is opening up to, I think now even more going beyond completely no gender space. And it's tough. We are pushing against a very strong glass ceiling, but I think we are getting there. And the other part is that corporates are the one place which has opened up largely. So if women can create successful entrepreneurs and they can make more money, that's where we are seeing a lot more women actually taking it up, and venture capitalists actually trusting. They are now looking at only the brains, they're looking at them, they're not looking at the person. So that's something which is very wonderful happening. But yes, I do believe that we still have a very long way to go. And people like Jess and Pratibha are, creating those paths, and they're leading the way to creating a very different kind of where we should not necessarily have this kind of a discussion where whether we are getting the opportunity, how can we find more such space. So I think we're soon getting there. And just to give a small example, Cactus is actually one of those organizations where after a long time, I've worked in entertainment, I've worked in e-commerce, and I worked in retail. They're extremely male-dominated organizations, and it was a completely different experience working with Cactus, which has over 65%, or I think 62% women as part of the organization. And so that kind of speaks for itself, where we obviously not necessarily judging which direction we want to go, but it's just trusting who is really good for the job, who is actually the right person, the right fit for that particular assignment. And that's something which I think we are yet to get there completely, but I think we are getting there. And this whole stereotyping that women possibly will be able to go up to here and beyond that is not possible. I think that's going away as we speak.
Thanks, Dina. That was a good thing. So in the interest of time, we'll have another question from the participant, and we'll take it really quick. So it's basically, the question is, education for a researcher, does it involve technology? And with technology evolving constantly, can you manage to go it smoothly, or it becomes a roadblock for you? If you could answer on this, comment on this in as briefly.
So since we're a technology company, do you mind if I take it up, like just a minute? So
I think, not to interrupt, for the sake of time, I'd say, Dina, you can you can go ahead and answer this question.
So we are working to ensuring that technology becomes easy, seamless, and accessible. So that's something which, if you're reading for research and you're stuck with Google Scholar or Microsoft Academia or PubMed, and these are the only options you have, there are now technologies. There are actually quite a few platforms which have opened up, which gives you access, which gives you speed, which gives you efficiency of reading what is relevant for your research, whether with that segment, or whether you are looking to, like you mentioned, educating yourself on technology. It's actually much more easier now. And if researchers were to actually try the newer technologies which are out there, we can have a session like that for the STEMPeers group. It's actually quite interesting, because life is being made as we speak very easy for researchers, whether it is to publish for research, whether read for research, application for grants, understanding how to create go through courses which help you become a better researcher. Technology is actually solving that. So, and the way we look at it is that if technology is solving areas of travel, of e-commerce, or for shopping, or for medical reasons, why can't it do for research? And that's exactly where we are focusing. And I do believe technology is the future, and investing your time to know more about it will definitely help you much more as you go down the line.
Thank you, Dina. Okay, so I have it's time to wrap up this session. This was extremely inspiring, and we keep getting comments from different people how wonderful it was to hear you all talk about your journey. So one final comment for those who want to make a change, or as Pratibha said, want to revolutionize, but not sure how to go about that, or being some kind of change, being an entrepreneur, being in the forefront of technology to make life of researchers better. What is one advice that you can give those people? Jess touched upon it briefly, but just one way to just end, what would that advice be? Jess, I'll have you go first.
I would say network. Your network is you can leverage your network in order to change the world. And every time I've been super effective at something, it's because I was surrounded by people in my network who helped me be successful. I think that in science and in STEM in general, networking is not really something that's emphasized. And there's, these old relationships that are between faculty they'll leverage those relationships to give you opportunities, but really networking outside of that realm, especially if you want to make a really big impact, try to figure out who the influences are in whatever field you want to have an impact in. Follow them on Twitter, follow them on LinkedIn, and start identifying people that you can reach out to. Your network is 100% going to help determine your success. So I'm an introvert. It was hard for me to start approaching people and in a very deliberate way, but you have to be deliberate if you have big goals and you want to make a big impact.
Dina, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I agree with Jess. Your network is actually your net worth. So that makes a lot of sense. And I do believe that networking is something, it's something which pays you your dividends much later, even when you have started your entrepreneurial journey. But I also would like to add something which Sohini, you had mentioned in terms of a part of attributes which researchers need to have is, I would like to stress on, is communication. I do feel that the scientific world is very happy with what they do, but what goes out as information is so much more fabulous that if that can be like a course mandated for researchers from PhD onwards, that'd be outstanding, because I think communicating science is actually giving it the real strength of its actual application or if its actual understanding. So I think communication is something which researchers, and whether it is in terms of communicating through content, whether it is communicating in person, whether it's communicating as part of being a network, finding mentors to understand how to really present themselves, all of these as part of building their communication skills, assets, and attributes, that's something which I believe with every paper have a blog post. Like with every paper, put out a post there. Like that's it. Just put out your link there. Don't just put it on Twitter that I published. Put out something more that I published, and today my rat is fatter or thinner or whatever. So I'm solving diabetes. That's it. My rat is thinner. I'm solving diabetes. So put it out there. Make it funny. Make it quirky. Let the non-scientific audience reach out to you. So that's something which we really feel that's something which researchers will benefit from.
Pratibha, final words for those who are trying to take the paths less taken.
I think 100% agree with both what Jess and Dina said. What Jess specifically said really stood out to me. Networking is key to success in transitioning from academia or anywhere for that matter. I think it's one of the key skills that we lack a lot, which is not taught anywhere. So I think it's something that we really need to do effectively. And what Dina mentioned as well, like communication is key. As a scientist, I knew that. I never applied it. Now I know it, and therefore I had to do it. So it's kind of definitely one of the key skills. For me, I think the only advice I would leave anyone is, one thing is just commit to doing what you decide to do. Just do it, in the words of Nike, and just go for it 100%. Explore. Don't be afraid of taking those chances, because they often pay off more than you think they do. And besides that, I think I would also encourage scientists to think beyond their labs, to always think of what is it that they're taking away skills from what they're doing, instead of just knowledge, or just think of mindsets they're developing instead of just the knowledge. Because we often teach our children in these three terms. So we talk about knowledge, skills, and mindsets. And I think scientists are great at knowledge, but often the skills and mindsets is not something we reflect on consciously. And I think whenever you transition into something outside of academia, these are the two things that you need to kind of project more than the knowledge. And I think this is something that Jess also mentioned earlier about what you show on your resume is not just that I know how to do qPCR or a Western blot successfully, but that I know how to be successful in the role that I'm in. And I think that transferability comes through reflection while you're studying in academia or while you're part of academia. You have to consciously kind of think about that a lot more, instead of just kind of focusing and drilling your head down into the lab. So that would be, I think, my advice.
Wow, this was a very, very informative for sure, but extremely inspiring, I would say. Now that we have more people who are trying to go away from the norm and making sure that becomes as norm as the traditional paths that we are aware of. But extremely inspiring. Thank you so much, Pratibha, Jess, and Dina. This was a wonderful hour and a little bit more than an hour of discussion that we had. But I also want to take this opportunity to thank STEMPeers for being that platform which supports STEM professionals in their career journey, be it the traditional one or be it those who are trying to take those risks, for supporting to have these conferences where we can bring in more people and talk about their stories, and that in turn hopefully inspires a larger group of people to do something similar or something different, and in turn influence the population that is out there. So thank you so much. And with that, I think
everyone. Yeah. Thank you, all the panelists, everyone. It was great to interact during this 1 hour with all of you.
All right. Yes. Thank you, Sanchari, for being my partner on this one. All right. With that, over and out from STEMPeers Global Conference.